They say that memory is a strange thing. It fades at the edges, losing the colors of the past, until only the most vivid moments remain. For me, that night hasn't faded. It's been 26 years, yet I can still feel the cold air of that September evening against my skin. I was 12 years old, an age where you feel old enough to rule the world, but you're still small enough to fear the dark. My parents were heading out for the night, leaving the house in the hands of my 18-year-old brother Zach. At the time, it felt like a gift. A house with no rules. No bedtime. Just me in the vast, quiet space of our family home. But silence, as I would soon learn, isn't always empty. Sometimes, silence is waiting. The departure and the first mistake. Zach was restless. I could see it in the way he kept checking his watch, his eyes darting toward the driveway. He had plans that didn't involve babysitting his younger brother. "Look," he said, leaning in with a conspiratorial grin, "I'm heading out for a couple of hours. Just some friends. Don't tell Mom and Dad, and I'll bring you something back." I nodded eagerly. Why wouldn't I? I trusted him, and more importantly, I wanted the house to myself. When his car pulled away, the silence settled in. It was heavy. To fill the void, I did what any 12-year-old shouldn't do when they're alone. I chose a horror movie. I remember the blue light of the television flickering against the walls, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to dance just out of the corner of my eye. I sat on the edge of the sofa, a bowl of popcorn forgotten beside me. Every sound in the house began to amplify. The rhythmic hum of the refrigerator. The house settling into its foundation with a groan. The wind tapping against the glass like a desperate finger. I told myself it was just a movie. Just my imagination. But deep down, my instincts were already screaming. Halfway through the film, I couldn't take it anymore. I reached for the remote and clicked it off. The sudden darkness was absolute. I sat there in the silence, listening to my own heartbeat. It was fast. Too fast. I decided to head to my room, moving quickly, the way you do when you feel like something is following you up the stairs. I went into the bathroom to brush my teeth, splashing cold water on my face, trying to wash away the paranoia. "You're fine," I whispered to the mirror. To calm down, I turned on my Xbox 360 to play some Call of Duty. The familiar sounds of the game were a comfort, until they weren't. Hours passed in a blur of pixels and noise. Then, through my headset, I felt it. Not a sound, but a vibration. A heavy, dull thud from downstairs. The front door had closed. A wave of relief washed over me. Zach is home, I thought. I leaned back, waiting to hear his heavy footsteps heading to his room. But the steps didn't go to his room. They stayed in the kitchen. They were slow. Soft. Not the hurried, careless stride of a teenager, but the deliberate, muffled movements of someone trying to remain unheard. I walked to the window and looked out into the driveway. Zach's parking spot was empty. The street was a graveyard of shadows. And that's when the true panic set in, the realization that someone was in the house, and it wasn't my brother. The neighbor's shadow. Deep dive. 8 to 11:30, the illusion of safety. The second time I felt that cold shiver of mortality, I was even younger. 10 years old. We lived in a small, tight-knit town where nobody locked their doors. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, your business, and your family history. My uncle lived with us, so the house was rarely empty. But one Tuesday, the stars aligned in the worst way possible. My grandmother had gone to her weekly bingo game. My uncle had headed out to the next town for work. My father told me he'd be back late and warned me, as he always did, not to open the door for anyone. I remember watching his taillights disappear down the gravel road, feeling like the king of my own little castle. I turned on the TV, settled into the oversized armchair, and let the flickering screen lull me into a sense of security. But barely 10 minutes had passed when a heavy knock echoed through the hallway. Thud. 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 I froze. I called out through the wood, my voice cracking, "Who is it?" "It's David, kid." "Open up," came the reply. David was our neighbor. He was a fixture at our family barbecues, a man who drank beer with my father and helped fix our car. He was a friend. But as I looked through the peephole, I saw a version of David I didn't recognize. His eyes were bloodshot, his movements erratic. He was swaying, his shadow stretching long and distorted across our porch. The intrusion. I told him through the locked door that my father wasn't home. "I know," David whispered. His voice had a jagged edge to it that I'd never heard before. "I saw him leave. I just need to wait inside for a bit." In my child's mind, the conflict was agonizing. My father said don't open the door for strangers. But David wasn't a stranger. He was a neighbor. I made the choice that would haunt my family for years. I turned the deadbolt. The moment he stepped inside, the atmosphere in the room changed. The air felt thick, charged with something predatory. He didn't sit down. He didn't head for the kitchen. He placed his heavy, calloused hands on my shoulders and gripped them tight. He smelled of stale whiskey and something metallic. "You're a good kid," he said, but his face was twisted into a snarl. He dragged me toward the kitchen. My feet skidded on the linoleum. He reached into the knife block and pulled out the largest blade we owned. The serrated steel caught the dim light of the kitchen bulb. He held it to my throat, the cold metal pressing against my skin. "If you make a sound," he hissed, "I'll carve your mouth open. Do you understand?" I couldn't even cry. My vocal cords had turned to stone. I realized then that David hadn't come over to wait for my father. He had been watching the house. He knew exactly when the men were gone. He had timed his arrival to the very minute my protection vanished. The narrow escape and the dark secret. The only thing that saved me was the sound of tires on gravel. My grandmother's car. David stiffened. He clamped his hand over my mouth, pulling me into the shadows behind the door just as she walked in. I can still see the look on her face when she saw us. The bag of groceries hitting the floor, glass shattering, milk pooling like blood on the tiles. She didn't scream for help, she screamed for my uncle, who had unexpectedly returned with her. The struggle that followed was a blur of violence. My uncle, a man of immense strength and a hunter's precision, threw himself at David. I was shoved aside as the two men crashed into the furniture. But here is the part that keeps me awake at night, 20 years later. We never called the police. My uncle dragged David out of the house, threw him into the back of his truck, and drove off into the woods. He didn't come back until 4 a.m. Years later, I asked my grandmother why we never pressed charges. She looked away, her hands trembling as she sipped her tea. "Some things are handled within the community," she said. Then she mentioned that my uncle had gone hunting that night. But he didn't have his rifle with him. And nobody in town ever saw David again. To this day, when I pass those woods, I wonder if David is still out there, or if he's part of the earth beneath the pines.